Stories about America to read aloud. Story number 10, Whaling Days. "Come here, Kitty. Come, let's play. We're looking for whales," cried the little girl. "But be careful, Kitty. See that you don't fall into the ocean." The black and white kitten was careful. It watched ever so closely as it made its way across the deck of the big ship. Then it jumped into the arms of the little girl, and together they stood looking far across the ocean waves. The little girl's name was Laura, and she was almost 9 years old. She had a brother named Prescott. He was almost 5, and she had the strangest playground any little girl ever had, a whaling ship. For Laura and Prescott and their mother and father lived on a tall-masted whaling ship that sailed the great oceans long ago. The name of their ship was the Roman. Laura's father, she called him Papa, was the captain. His name was Captain Jared Jernigan. He had black hair and black chin whiskers, and hunting whales in the deep waters of the ocean was his business. Whales are the mightiest creatures in the world. Many years ago, men hunted them to get oil for lamps and candles because there were no electric lights then. One whale would give from 10 to 100 barrels of oil. Some whales' bones were valuable too, for whalebone was used in making ladies' clothing. So men sailed the oceans hunting the great creatures. Each trip lasted for years, and no boat returned home to America until it was loaded with oil and whalebone. On the day that Laura was playing on deck with her kitten, she had already lived on the Roman for 2 years. And it would be at least another year before the Roman was loaded with enough oil and whalebone so that Papa could call out the order to the crew, "All hands, get the ship under way for home." Laura had learned that living on a whaling ship was very different from living in a real house. Back home, the Jernigan family had a real house in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a whaling town beside the Atlantic Ocean. On top of the roof of their house was a wooden platform called a widow's walk. There Laura's mother had often stood and looked far out to sea, watching for Papa's ship to come home. It was lonely with Papa away hunting whales all the time, and little to do but stand on the roof and watch for his ship to return. So Mama and Laura and Prescott decided to go on a trip with him, and that is how Laura happened to have the deck of a whaling ship for her playground. Today we know what happened on that voyage because Laura wrote about it in letters in a little book she called her journal. When the trip began, Laura had not yet known how to write, but Mama taught Laura her lessons every day, how to read and write and spell, while Prescott played on the deck not far away. They were homeschooling. Laura was a good pupil, a good student. It was not long before she was writing letters to Grandma back home. And she wrote in her journal every day, putting down the things she had seen and done. My, she had exciting things to write. She wrote about strange sights in faraway places, of volcanoes and icebergs and storms and calm and fog. She wrote about palm trees and seashells. She wrote about the things she had to eat, especially plum duff. That was a treat the ship's cook made, a pudding with dried fruit. Once she wrote Grandma that she had visited an island named Ohitahu, and that the boat had stayed there 8 days. They had all gone to the Queen's palace, where the Queen prepared a feast for them. The Queen gave Laura 10 different kinds of fruit to eat. "I will name them," wrote Laura to Grandma. "Oranges, bananas, pineapples, plantains, breadfruit, coconuts, lemons, mummy apples, limes, guavas." It was on the islands they visited that Laura mailed her letters for homebound whaling ships to pick up. And it was on one of the islands that she got the little black and white kitten. "Look, Kitty," cried Laura as they stood staring out to sea. "Look at that spout of water way off there. Do you think it's a whale?" But before Kitty could even see, a shout was heard from the lookout, a sailor stationed high above deck on the mast. "There she blows!" shouted the lookout, and sure enough, out among the waves could be seen a spout like a water fountain. It was caused by a whale blowing out its breath. Oh my, the commotion then! It seemed as if the whole ship was suddenly in a hubbub, but it really wasn't. Every man just knew what to do. As Laura and Kitty watched, Papa ordered the crew to lower the small boat in which they would go out to get the whale. Then the men jumped into the small boat and rowed away. When they neared the whale, one man shot a harpoon deep into its body. Then another man killed it with a lance. The small boat was too far away for Laura to see all that was happening, but she and Kitty were very excited anyway. So were Mama and Prescott, who had come on deck, and all the ship's crew. For killing a whale was dangerous work. Whales were so big they could upset a small boat if they wanted to. An angry whale was a bad enemy. So everyone was happy when they saw the small boat coming safely back. The Romans sailed to the dead whale. Then began the hardest work of whaling. A whale boat was like a factory. Its job was to get the oil and bone from the whale. First, men had to cut the fat, they called it blubber, from the whale. Then the great rolls of white blubber were put into big iron pots called try-pots, and fires were started under them. That was how the whale oil was boiled out of the blubber. When the oil cooled, it was put into barrels and stored in the bottom of the ship. Meanwhile, men cut out the whale bones. All day and all night, Papa and the crew worked. The decks grew slippery with spilled whale oil. Black smoke gushed up from the try-pots, and men were busy tending the fires and keeping the bubbling pots filled with great chunks of blubber. Laura and Kitty watched till the supper time and bedtime, but by the next day everything was quiet again. The decks had been scrubbed clean, and only the last of the blubber was cooking away in the try-pots. Papa and the crew rested from their all-night work. Mama sewed and washed clothes and hung them on deck. Prescott played with Laura and Kitty. It was a long, quiet, peaceful day, and everyone was happy because now there was more oil and whalebone loaded onto the ship, and they were all that much closer to the day when Papa would give the order to start for home. Life on a whaling boat was exciting, but going home would be the most exciting part of all. After supper, Laura took her writing things and sat on the deck in the rosy glow of sunset. All around her lay the waters of the mighty ocean. She could hear the splash of the waves against the ship's sides, and could feel the boat's gentle rocking. She got out her journal and wrote another day's page. She didn't know that the words she wrote, and some of them misspelled too, would be read long afterwards by many people. Here is what Laura wrote in her journal that long ago evening on the whaling boat. It is a pleasant day. It is quite smooth today. The men are boiling out the blubber in try-pots. The pots are really large. When the men are going to boil out the blubber, 2 men get in the pots and squeeze out the blubber and are way up there to their knees in oil. We had baked potatoes for supper and biscuits. Would you like to hear some news? Well, I don't know of any. Goodbye for today. Goodbye, little Laura. We're glad you had a pleasant day and a good supper, and we think you had lots of news to tell us.